At my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law pointed to me, laughing, "That's Eleanor, our personal maid." They didn't know I'd sold my inheritance for their home. I just nodded. Soon they'd discover some things aren't meant to be taken. This is my story. Please like, share, and comment where you're listening from. My life, as I look back now, feels like a worn-out sponge, squeezed dry, its once vibrant color faded to a dull gray utility. I've given and given, pouring every drop of myself into others, only to find an echoing hollow where my own essence used to be. It's a strange, quiet kind of pain, this hollowness, like a cavity in the very core of my being that nobody else can see or comprehend. They only see the services rendered, the task completed, the problem solved, never the person who dissolved a little more with each act of selflessness. The cranberry stain on the pristine white tablecloth, weeks after a holiday dinner, was a perfect metaphor for my existence. Everyone had been so quick to point it out, to tut-tut over its stubborn permanence, yet nobody remembered who had spent hours scrubbing it, trying to erase the unwanted mark of a careless spill. It was just there, a testament to something that shouldn't be, a constant, irritating reminder. That's how I felt, a persistent, unacknowledged stain on the backdrop of their lives. Something to be managed, but never truly valued. I yearned for recognition, a hunger so deep it gnawed at my bones, yet it remained unspoken, unaddressed, unmet by the very family I dedicated my life to. A simple thank you, a genuine acknowledgement of my efforts would have been a feast for my starved soul. But it never came. The silence surrounding my sacrifices was deafening, eventually hardening into something cold and sharp within me. This silent yearning, this profound unfulfillment, wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It was the slow, deliberate turning of a key, unlocking something within me. It marked the beginning of a transformation, a quiet, permanent form of rebalance that started as a whisper and gradually grew into an undeniable force. My journey into this strange, unacknowledged existence began tragically early. Richard, my beloved husband, was only 30 when a sudden aneurysm stole him from me, leaving a gaping void and an 11-year-old Daniel in my bewildered arms. The world spun out of control, then settled into a stark, terrifying clarity. I was alone, and Daniel depended entirely on me. From that day forward, every decision, every breath, every ounce of my dwindling strength was for him. I made immense sacrifices, the kind that strip you bare and leave you wondering who you are outside of your children's needs. I learned to cut coupons with surgical precision, to stretch a single chicken into 3 dinners. I took on extra shifts, scrubbing floors after closing hours, my back aching, my hands raw, just to keep food on the table and Daniel in decent clothes. There were countless nights I would quietly skip dinner, claiming I'd eaten earlier, just so Daniel wouldn't notice the scarcity, wouldn't feel the pinch of our poverty. As he drifted off to sleep, I'd sit by his bed, stroking his hair, whispering, "You'll do great things, my boy. You'll do great things, and always remember where you came from, the sacrifices made for you." I believed those words with all my heart, clinging to the hope that my efforts wouldn't be in vain, that he would carry the memory of my struggle with him. Daniel grew into a bright, ambitious young man. When he turned 21, he fell in love with Chloe, a sweet, albeit flighty, girl, and they dreamed of buying their first home. My heart swelled with pride and a pang of dread. I knew what I had to do. My father's farmland, a small, inherited parcel of land that represented my last tangible link to my own lineage, my only security, was cashed in. It wasn't just dirt. It was my emergency fund, my potential retirement, my solace. But Daniel's future called louder. "It's just dirt, Daniel. You're my real future," I told him, forcing a bright smile, hiding the tremor in my hands as I signed away my legacy. The money from the sale became the substantial down payment for their charming little house, a fresh start for them, an undeniable end for me. The sacrifices continued to pile up, unnoticed and unremarked upon. Eleanor covered most of Daniel and Chloe's wedding expenses, ensuring Chloe had the fairy tale day she dreamed of, while Eleanor silently worried about her own dwindling savings. She paid for the dress, the flowers, the catering, while Daniel and Chloe focused on guest lists and honeymoon plans. It was my gift to them, my blessing, but also another piece of myself I quietly relinquished. Then came Leo, their beautiful baby boy, a tiny bundle of joy who instantly captured my heart. I eagerly transformed my spare guest room, the only space that was truly mine, into a charming nursery. I painted the walls a soft blue, assembled the crib, and lovingly decorated it. I can babysit anytime, I'd offered, genuinely thrilled to be a part of their new family's life, to immerse myself in the joy of my grandson. Any time soon became every time. Leo was with me constantly, during the day while Chloe ran errands or met friends, in the evenings when they wanted a date night, and sometimes for entire weekends. My life, which had already shrunk to serve Daniel, now revolved entirely around Leo's feeding schedule, nap times, and endless games of peekaboo. My world became smaller, consumed by their needs, the silence of my own desires growing louder. My own dreams, small and cherished, were continuously deferred, pushed aside like forgotten trinkets. The trip I'd always wanted to take with Richard, a quiet pilgrimage to the seaside town where we'd honeymoon, the rose garden I yearned to cultivate, a riot of color and fragrance, the poetry class I'd once excitedly signed up for, only to cancel due to unforeseen expenses. These dreams, once vivid and promising, now felt like faded photographs, distant echoes of a life I might have lived. They were always someday, and someday never arrived. During Daniel's layoff, when panic set into their young marriage, I secretly paid their mortgage for 6 long months. They never knew. Daniel would talk about their lucky break, how things always seemed to work out just when they were at their lowest. I'd simply smile and nod, my secret a heavy weight, yet also a source of quiet, perverse pride. They didn't need to know the extent of my love, the depth of my commitment. Ignorance was bliss, I suppose, for them. My days became a relentless cycle of service. I drove Leo to tutoring across town, navigating rush hour traffic, then rushed back to prepare dinner. I cooked their meals, cleaned their house, and folded their laundry. Endless tasks for an overwhelmed Chloe, who often felt too tired or too busy to manage. I picked up groceries, ran errands, and fixed broken appliances. I was their silent anchor, their invisible support system, their ever-present shadow. I never complained, not when my body ached from a long day of cleaning and carrying Leo, not when my own fridge lay bare, my pantry sparse because I'd spent my last few dollars on their household. I simply kept moving, kept doing, kept giving. Someday they'll see, I optimistically whispered to myself, a desperate prayer in the quiet moments between chores. But that day never arrived. My hope, though stubborn, began to fray at the edges, like an old, beloved blanket. To them, I was a perpetual background figure, an extension of their home, always available, always silent. I wasn't a person with thoughts, feelings, or desires. I was a utility, a resource to be drawn upon at will. They saw Eleanor the babysitter, Eleanor the maid, Eleanor the family ATM, but never Eleanor the woman, the mother, the individual. My very existence seemed to fade into the wallpaper, a comfortable, unnoticed part of their domestic landscape. Despite it all, despite the hollowness and the silent ache, I clung to a stubborn, foolish hope. My identity had become so deeply intertwined with their needs, my purpose so entirely wrapped up in their well-being, that I didn't know how to exist without it. To stop giving, to step back, felt like a betrayal of who I had become, a renunciation of the only meaning I had left. So I continued, faithfully, silently, pushing down the whispers of resentment, holding on to the fragile thread of someday they'll see, unaware that the rebalance had already begun, slowly, subtly, and irrevocably. Thursday dinners, once the highlight of my week, the anchor in my sea of solitude, had slowly, imperceptibly devolved into something cold and dismissive. They were gatherings now, yes, but devoid of warmth, laughter, or genuine connection. I remembered a time when Daniel, as a boy, would practically bounce with excitement, helping me set the table, eagerly anticipating my cooking. Even after he married Chloe, there was a period of grace, a lingering sense of family. But that was long ago. Now these weekly rituals felt less like a reunion and more like a mandatory attendance, a check box on their busy lives. I walked into their brightly lit kitchen, the scent of roasting meat greeting me, yet no one looked up. Daniel, focused on a game on his phone, barely grunted a greeting, his eyes still glued to the screen. Chloe, sprawled on the couch, scrolling through social media, simply waved a hand in my general direction, her own attention completely absorbed by the digital world. "Hi, Eleanor," she mumbled without looking up, a distant, almost perfunctory acknowledgement. It was as if I were a ghost, a presence so familiar that I no longer warranted a direct glance, a genuine welcome. The air was thick with their indifference, a heavy blanket that smothered any spark of joy I might have brought. At the table, the atmosphere was equally strained. Chloe, still scrolling on her phone, pushed a bowl of potatoes towards me. "They're a little overcooked," she mumbled, not bothering to lift her gaze. It wasn't an apology, more of a declaration of fact, a subtle criticism delivered with utmost casualness. My shoulders tensed. I had taught her how to cook those potatoes, how to time them perfectly, how to add a hint of rosemary. The words stung, not for the potatoes themselves, but for the utter lack of care, the dismissive tone that seemed to encompass my entire presence. As dinner progressed, the familiar silence weighed heavy. I tried to soften the atmosphere to inject a semblance of the warmth I remembered. "Can I help with the dishes after, Chloe?" I offered gently, hoping to create a shared task, a moment of connection. Without missing a beat, Chloe curtly replied, "No need, Eleanor. We've got it." Her eyes remained fixed on her screen, the words a barrier rather than a polite refusal. My offer, my attempt to be useful, to be needed, was deflected, making me feel even more superfluous. Daniel sat at the head of the table, carving the roast with visible frustration. His movements were choppy, almost violent, as if battling the meat rather than preparing it. He seemed agitated, sighing loudly every now and then, though he said nothing. Leo, now 12, was completely absorbed in his own world, his tablet glowing in front of him, earbuds firmly in place. He occasionally shoveled food into his mouth, utterly oblivious to the strained silence, to my presence, to anything beyond the flickering images on his screen. It was a tableau of disconnected lives, a family united by proximity, yet miles apart in spirit. I took a deep breath, clutching the edge of the tablecloth. I had prepared for this moment, rehearsed the words in my head. Today was special. "You know," I began, clearing my throat, trying to inject a cheerful, light tone into my voice. "Today's a special day, May 9th. Your father and I," before I could finish, before I could share the cherished memory of Richard and I, the day we first met, the day that sparked the love that led to Daniel, Chloe let out a dramatic, exaggerated sigh. "Oh God, here we go," she muttered, rolling her eyes so far back they nearly disappeared. The raw contempt in her voice, the blatant disrespect, hit me like a physical blow. My voice faltered, the warmth evaporating instantly. I looked at Daniel, hoping for a sign of recognition, a flicker of understanding, but he didn't even lift his head. "Mom," he snapped, his voice sharp with irritation, "no one wants to hear about that again. You've told that story 100 times. His words, cold and cutting, were a direct assault on my memories, on the very foundation of our family. He didn't just dismiss the story, he dismissed me, my past, my feelings. My heart constricted. The cheerful tone I had tried so hard to maintain shattered. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, but I swallowed them down, refusing to show weakness. Daniel, sensing my silence, grew even more agitated. He slammed his fork onto the plate, the clang echoing through the quiet room. "For God's sake, can we have one meal without a history lecture?" he demanded, his voice laced with venom. I froze. My hand, which had been resting gently on my lap, instinctively clutched the linen napkin, crushing it into a tight ball. The world seemed to shrink, the bright lights of the dining room suddenly too harsh, the air too thin. I stared at the scarred wooden table, the familiar grain blurring before my eyes. Then, through the haze of my shock, I heard a voice. Leo, my grandson, my sweet Leo, removed his earbuds for the first time all evening. He looked up, a cruel smirk twisting his young face. Yeah, he echoed, his voice surprisingly clear and loud. Shut up, widow. The words sliced through me, sharper than any knife. Widow. It wasn't just an insult. It was a weaponized truth, a brutal reminder of my loss, thrown back at me by the child I had doted on, the child for whom I had sacrificed so much. The utter callousness, the blatant cruelty from a child who had once called me Nanny Eleanor with such innocent affection was a betrayal beyond anything I had ever imagined. Chloe let out a quiet giggle, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that confirmed her complicity, her approval of her son's barbarity. Daniel, meanwhile, simply continued eating, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred, as if his son hadn't just emotionally vivisected his mother at the dinner table. Their silence, their utter lack of reaction, was a more profound injury than the words themselves. It was an affirmation that this was acceptable, that I deserved it, that I was less than human in their eyes. In that moment, something inside me fractured. Not loudly, not dramatically, but silently, like a delicate piece of glass breaking in my hand, the cracks spreading through my very core. The Eleanor who had given and sacrificed, who had clung to hope in a misplaced sense of duty, shattered. She was gone. My gaze drifted to the roast, sitting in the center of the table, perfectly browned. I remembered teaching Daniel how to season it, how to tie the string, how to ensure it was tender and juicy. We had laughed that day, our hands covered in herbs and spices, a shared moment of warmth and connection. Now the roast sat there, a mockery of a memory, a symbol of everything that had been lost, everything that had been defiled. The ensuing silence in the dining room felt deafening, heavier, more painful than the insult itself. It pressed down on me, suffocating me, confirming the absolute void where my family's love should have been. It was an emptiness that swallowed not just the words, but my very breath. Then, Sarah, Chloe's sister, who had been quietly observing from the side, offered a weak, uncertain smile. He didn't mean it that way, Eleanor, she whispered, a desperate attempt at damage control. I met her gaze, a cold certainty settling in my eyes. Didn't he, I thought? Didn't he, really? Because it certainly felt like he did. It felt like they all did. I quietly pushed back my chair, the scrape a jarring sound in the oppressive silence. I stood, my movements slow and deliberate, a strange calm washing over me. Thank you for dinner, I said, my voice steady, devoid of any emotion, any tremor of pain. It was a courtesy, an empty gesture. Chloe, still not meeting my gaze, looked up from her phone, a flicker of mild surprise on her face. But we haven't had dessert, she said, as if my departure were a breach of etiquette, an inconvenience rather than the inevitable consequence of their cruelty. I'm on a diet, I calmly replied, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. It was easier than explaining the profound emptiness, the sudden inability to swallow anything more they might offer. No one rose from the table. No one walked me to the door. No one offered a goodbye hug or a word of apology. I simply turned and walked out, leaving the noise of their indifference behind me. The front door clicked shut with a soft finality. Outside, the porch light flickered erratically, casting long, shifting shadows. The night air was cool on my face, a welcome balm to the burning within. I stood there for a long moment, staring into the darkness, a profound realization settling over me, cold and heavy. I think that was my last Thursday dinner, I whispered to myself, the words barely audible, yet ringing with the weight of an irreversible decision. The quiet embrace of my home, usually a soothing balm after a long day, felt different tonight. I stepped through the threshold, the silence not peaceful but suffocating, profoundly cold. It pressed down on me, heavy and vast, far more oppressive than the indifferent chatter I'd left behind at Daniel and Chloe's. The internal fracture I'd felt at their dining table now resonated through the empty rooms, echoing in every corner, leaving a chilling void. My carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of sacrifice and unspoken hope, had not just cracked, it had crumbled, leaving behind only dust in the stinging debris of betrayal. The familiar ritual of making tea felt strangely detached. The kettle whistled its cheerful tune, a sound usually associated with a comfort, but tonight it was just noise. I ignored it, my mind elsewhere, as I mechanically spooned chamomile into a mug, the fragrant steam doing little to warm the chill that had settled deep within my bones. My hands moved on their own, a practiced choreography, while my mind replayed the scene at dinner, a broken reel of insults and indifference. I carried the tea to my favorite armchair by the window, the warmth of the mug offering no solace against the creeping coldness in my heart. I sat there staring out at the empty street, the flickering lamppost casting long, lonely shadows. My phone lay beside me, a small dark rectangle of silence. I found myself staring at it, willing it to light up, to vibrate, to offer a sliver of proof that I mattered. A message, "Did you get home safe?" A perfunctory, "Sorry for dinner." Anything. But the screen remained stubbornly, frustratingly dark. The silence of my phone spoke volumes, amplifying the message I'd received at dinner. I was not worth checking on. I was an afterthought, a disposable utility. The emptiness outside mirrored the profound emptiness within me, an acknowledgement of my utter insignificance in their lives. Leo's cruel words, "Shut up, widow," reverberated relentlessly in my mind, an endless loop of pain. Each syllable was a fresh stab, tearing at old wounds, poisoning memories. It wasn't just the words, but the way they were said, the sneering contempt, the casual cruelty from a child I had loved without reservation. And Chloe's soft giggle, Daniel's silent complicity, they cemented the message. This wasn't an isolated incident, a childish outburst. This was how they truly saw me, a relic, a burden, a ghost of a past that inconvenienced their present. The word widow, once a quiet descriptor of my profound loss, had been weaponized, flung at me with a venom that made the grief for Richard feel fresh, raw, and newly desecrated. My son, my grandson, had taken the most vulnerable part of my identity and twisted it into an insult. A slow, deliberate anger began to simmer beneath the surface of my pain. It was a cold anger, not a fiery rage, but something far more dangerous, born of quiet desperation and profound disillusionment. My gaze drifted across the room, settling on my old, leather-bound day planner, nestled amongst bills and old mail on the small writing desk. It was a practical, unassuming object, usually filled with mundane entries, doctor's appointments, grocery lists, reminders to water the plants, the unremarkable chronicle of a life dedicated to routine. I rose from the armchair, my movements stiff, as if the night's events had aged me by decades. My fingers traced the worn leather cover, the faint scent of old paper and dust rising to meet me. I opened it, flipping past the calendars and contact pages, past the notes for my gardening club and the occasional recipe I jotted down. I wasn't looking for a future appointment, but a record of the past, a chilling ledger I had kept for reasons I hadn't fully understood until this very moment. My fingers stopped on a tab marked Family Contributions. My neat, precise handwriting filled page after page, each entry a small testament to a sacrifice, a forgotten kindness, a piece of myself quietly surrendered. It wasn't just a record of money, though the dollar amounts were staggering. It was a tangible chronicle of my entire adult life, documented with an almost clinical precision that belied the emotional weight of each line. I began to read, the words on the page an undeniable echo of my life's unfolding. May 15th, 2003, sale of father's farmland, $185,000 for Daniel and Chloe's home down payment. The memory of signing those papers, the forced smile, the ache in my chest as I gave away my last piece of security came flooding back. "It's just dirt, Daniel. You're my real future." How foolish those words sounded now, how naive. October 10th, 2004, wedding expenses, catering, Chloe's dress, flowers, $32,000. I recalled the endless consultations, the silent acceptance of their lavish choices, the private anxiety over my dwindling savings. November 2008, May 2009, mortgage payments during Daniel's layoff, $1,800 a month, 6 months equals $10,800. They never knew. They spoke of a lucky break, attributing their fortune to chance, never to my desperate, secret struggle. Ongoing, gas for Leo's tutoring, 3x week, groceries, family dinners, and their weekly stock. Utility payments, various. These were smaller, recurring costs, but they added up. A steady drain on my limited pension, a constant tightening of my own belt. Time contributed, babysitting Leo, average 48 hours a week, house cleaning, bi-weekly, cooking. These weren't monetary entries, but the meticulous details I'd included spoke volumes. Dates, hours, tasks, the transformation of my guest room into Leo's nursery, the endless hours spent driving, cleaning, nurturing, always without complaint, always with a smile. Page after page, the numbers accumulated, the tasks itemized, each line a silent accusation against the indifference I had just faced. The sheer volume of my giving was overwhelming, an undeniable testament to a love that had been boundless, unconditional, and utterly unrequited. My neat handwriting, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to mock me, a stark contrast to the chaotic, painful reality of my existence. I saw not just money and time, but a lifetime of deferred dreams, of suppressed desires, of a quiet, relentless erosion of my own self. I had emptied myself for them, and they had spit me out. As I turned the last page, a new resolve began to solidify within me. The pain was still there, a raw, throbbing wound, but beneath it, something hard and unyielding was forming. The Eleanor who had given so readily, so selflessly, was gone. In her place, a new Eleanor was slowly, deliberately taking shape, one who had finally seen the ledger clearly, one who understood the true cost of her generosity. The balance was severely skewed, and it was time, she realized, for a reckoning. The quiet hum of my refrigerator was the only sound in the house as I meticulously reviewed the financial entries in my old day planner. Each line item was a stark, brutal reminder of a sacrifice, a moment of choice where I had prioritized their needs over my own, their comfort over my security. My neat handwriting, usually a source of calm, now felt like a cold, dispassionate accountant's ledger, charting the slow, deliberate erosion of my life savings. It was more than just numbers. It was the tangible record of a woman who believed love meant limitless giving, even at her own expense. I had started the documentation years ago, not out of resentment, but out of a practical need to track my own expenses. As a retired school librarian living on a modest pension, every dollar mattered. But over time, as the family contributions section grew, it became something else entirely. A silent testament to a belief system, a hope that these sacrifices would one day be recognized, cherished, and reciprocated, if not in kind, then at least in genuine affection and respect. The first major entry leapt out at me, $28,000 for Daniel's first home. This wasn't the full amount from my father's farmland, which had been significantly more, but the direct cash injection I'd given them for their down payment, an amount that represented a significant portion of my immediate liquid savings. I remember the realtor's office, the thick stack of papers, the tremor in my hand as I signed the check. Daniel had been so proud, so grateful, or so I had thought. He'd hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Mom. This means everything." Those words now felt like a cruel taunt, hollow and empty. Then came the wedding, $10,000 to cover Daniel and Chloe's lavish celebration. They had wanted a fairy tale, and I, in my misguided love, had wanted to give it to them. The cost had stretched my budget to its breaking point, forcing me to dip into funds I'd earmarked for unexpected emergencies. But the sight of Chloe in her beautiful dress, Daniel's proud smile, had momentarily erased the financial strain. Another silent sacrifice, another quiet giving. As Leo grew, so did the expenses. $12,000 for Leo's private school and tutors. "He's a bright boy, Eleanor, but he needs that extra push," Chloe had said, almost as if it were a demand rather than a request. My heart had ached for Leo to succeed, to have opportunities I never had, so I emptied more of my meager pension, telling myself it was an investment in his future. The school fees, the extra lessons in math and English, the specialized art classes Chloe insisted upon, each entry a quiet relinquishment of my own financial security. Then came Daniel's layoff, a period of intense anxiety for them, and a period of secret struggle for me. $7,000 to safeguard their mortgage during his temporary unemployment. I had transferred the money in monthly installments, ensuring their payments were never missed, never knowing the source of their lucky breaks. I'd listened to their worries, offered comforting words, all while silently bearing the burden of keeping their world intact. Chloe's unexpected dental surgery, a costly procedure she couldn't afford on her own, saw another $5,000 leave my account. And when their car broke down, an urgent necessity for Daniel's commute, it was $3,000 from me that got it back on the road. Each time they expressed gratitude, fleeting and superficial, quickly forgotten once the crisis passed. Beyond these major sums, there were dozens of smaller entries, weekly groceries that seemed to disappear into a bottomless pit, contributions to family vacations they couldn't afford, summer camp fees for Leo, a seemingly endless stream of birthday and holiday gifts that went beyond the token. And then the unquantifiable hours of babysitting, the cleaning, the cooking, the transportation, a lifetime of unpaid labor, meticulously logged but assigned no monetary value in their eyes, only an expectation. I tallied the columns, my heart growing heavier with each digit. The grand total, just from the direct financial contributions, surpassed $70,000. $70,000. All of it from a retired school librarian's modest pension, savings carefully accumulated over decades of prudent living. This sum, I knew, didn't even begin to account for the years of cooking and cleaning, the hours of transportation, the countless days of free childcare that had consumed my entire being. If I were to calculate my hourly rate for all the tasks I'd performed, the true cost would have been astronomical, easily double or triple that figure. My hand ran over the numbers, the ink feeling cold and distant beneath my fingertips. It was a silent eulogy for the woman I once was, the woman who believed unconditional love meant limitless giving, who believed that her selflessness would eventually be seen, understood, and appreciated. I had thought I was supporting my family, laying a foundation for their success, believing with every fiber of my being that one day they would look back and say, "Mom carried us through. Mom made it all possible." Instead, they perceived me as an outdated relic, a burden, a woman with nothing but old stories and burned potatoes. I was a fixture, not a person. My purpose in their eyes was to serve, to provide, to disappear into the background until needed again. The thought was a bitter pill, a betrayal of my deepest beliefs. Leo's words echoed again. "Shut up, widow," a chilling refrain in the silence of my home, delivered without a blink of hesitation, without a shred of remorse. My hands trembled, clutching the now cold teacup, the porcelain rattling against the saucer. The image of his young face, twisted in a smirk, seared itself into my mind. How could such cruelty spring from a child I had loved so fiercely, guided so gently? A profound grief settled over me, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't the grief of death, for Richard was long gone, his memory a bittersweet ache. This was a different kind of grief, a recognition of my own erasure while still present, a mournful acknowledgement of the living death I had endured at the hands of those I cherished most. I was a ghost in my own life, invisible and unheard, even when I stood right before them. I didn't cry that night. The tears simply wouldn't come. I was too broken, too drained, too numb to fall apart. Not yet. Not there. The well of my emotions felt dry, scorched by years of unacknowledged pain. But beneath the numbness, a quiet, cold resolve began to coalesce. The old Eleanor, the giver, the silent sufferer, was gone. And in her place, something new, something hard and unyielding was about to emerge. The night was a long, desolate stretch of wakefulness. I sat by the window, wrapped tightly in my mother's decades-old quilt, its familiar weight offering a meager comfort against the biting chill of emotional devastation. Outside, streetlights flickered erratically in the dense fog that had rolled in, their hazy glow painting the empty street in shades of gray. Each pulse of light seemed to mirror the sporadic, painful throbbing in my chest. My chamomile tea had grown cold hours ago, a forgotten casualty of my internal turmoil. Yet I clung to the mug, hoping its ghost of warmth would somehow reach the profound ache that settled deep within me. Leo's dismissive phrase, "Shut up, widow," spun ceaselessly in my mind, a terrible, unshakable tune. It was a poison seeping into every thought, every memory, staining the years of love and sacrifice. It was an epitaph, written by a child, for a life I thought was full of meaning. The audacity, the casual cruelty of it, still made my stomach clench. He had taken the most sacred, painful part of my identity, my connection to Richard, and reduced it to a derogatory slur. But worse than Leo's cruel words, worse than Chloe's giggle, was Daniel's profound silence. My son, the boy I had raised from 11 years old, the man for whom I had uprooted my life, sold my inheritance, and emptied my pockets. He had not intervened. He had not flinched. He had simply continued to eat, as if his son's words were a perfectly acceptable part of dinner conversation, as if his mother's heart wasn't being ripped to shreds before his very eyes. That silence, that utter lack of defense or even a hint of discomfort, resonated more deeply than any insult. It was a confirmation of my absolute insignificance, a chilling validation of their collective contempt. It wasn't just that they didn't appreciate me, it was that they didn't even see me. The night wore on, the fog outside refusing to lift, much like the cloud of despair clinging to my soul. But slowly, imperceptibly, a different feeling began to stir. Not hope, not yet, more like a stubborn ember, refusing to be extinguished. My stiff knees protesting, I finally pushed myself out of the armchair. My legs felt heavy, my body a vessel carrying a wounded spirit. My gaze drifted across the room, past the day planner and its damning ledger, to my old mahogany dresser. The top drawer creaked open, a sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. Beneath a stack of neatly folded sweaters, untouched for years, lay a small, intricately carved mahogany box. It was a relic from a different lifetime, a time when my world was vibrant, filled with love and laughter and the comforting presence of my Richard. I lifted it out, my fingers tracing the smooth, cool wood. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a collection of letters. Letters from Richard, my late husband, penned even after cell phones had made such correspondence technically unnecessary. We had lived in the same house, seen each other every day, yet he continued to write. Ink holds more heart, he had always said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Something about the effort, the permanence, that just gets lost in a quick call. A sentiment I now understood profoundly. These weren't just letters. They were fragments of his soul preserved on paper, a tangible link to a love that had once been my entire universe. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded a letter at random, its edges softened by time and countless readings. Richard's messy yet familiar handwriting greeted me, instantly transporting me back to a time when I felt seen, valued, adored. The words, penned in his strong, confident script, jumped off the page, not just as a message from the past, but as a lifeline in my present despair. Eleanor, I know you always doubt yourself, but you shouldn't. You are the glue holding everything together. You make everything beautiful, even when you don't realize it. One day, if they ever forget that, if they ever take you for granted, I hope you remember it for yourself. Remember who you are, what you are worth. You are my world, my North Star. Don't let anyone dim your light, my love. I pressed the worn paper to my chest, closing my eyes, feeling a profound shift within me, like a lock clicking open that had been rusted shut for decades. The words were a balm, a revelation, a mirror reflecting a truth I had forgotten. Richard had seen me. He had always seen me, not just as a wife or a mother, but as Eleanor, a person of immense worth and quiet strength. He had predicted this moment, this painful realization, and in his timeless wisdom, he had left me a reminder. For so long, I had spent my life giving, pouring myself out endlessly, hoping someone would eventually say, Mom, you've done enough. You can rest now. We see you. But they never had. And perhaps, I realized with a sudden chilling clarity, they never would. That was the hard truth, the unvarnished reality that had finally ripped away the last vestiges of my self-delusion. But then, another thought, a nascent spark of defiance began to flicker. Perhaps their inability to see my worth, their relentless taking, didn't mean I was unworthy. Perhaps it meant they were blind. Perhaps it meant they had taken so much for so long, had become so accustomed to my limitless generosity, that they had simply forgotten I was a person, a complex individual with feelings and needs and a history, not merely a service provider. They had stripped me of my humanity, piece by piece, without even realizing they were doing it. The old Eleanor, the one who lived for their approval, who craved their validation, was dissolving, melting away like the fog outside my window. In her place, a new Eleanor was beginning to coalesce, one forged in the crucible of betrayal and illuminated by the enduring light of a forgotten love. Richard's words, echoing from the past, had gifted me a glimpse of myself, a self I had lost somewhere in the endless cycle of giving. And with that glimpse came a chilling new understanding. If they had forgotten who I was, then it was time to remind them. The quiet hum of the early morning, still wrapped in the lingering fog, felt different now. Richard's words had cut through the emotional haze, leaving behind a stark, blinding clarity. The grief for my erased self was still present, a dull ache, but it was now accompanied by a surprising surge of energy, a quiet determination. I had spent years, decades even, building my identity around their needs, around the unspoken promise of recognition. That promise had been brutally broken, and in its place a new resolve had formed, cold and sharp as winter ice. Driven by this newfound clarity, I rose from my armchair, leaving the comfort of my mother's quilt in the memory of Richard's letter. My stiff knees, which had protested earlier, now moved with a surprising purpose. I crossed the living room to the hallway closet, a seemingly innocuous space filled with old coats, board games, and various household detritus. But deep within its recesses, tucked behind a stack of rarely used towels, lay my secret. My fingers found the familiar texture of a discreet, nondescript folder. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was a simple manila folder, meticulously labeled in my neat handwriting. Quiet Nest Egg. The very name was a testament to its clandestine nature, a private reserve carefully built and fiercely protected, a silent act of defiance in a life largely defined by open-handed giving. I carried the folder back to my armchair, the weight of it feeling heavier tonight, imbued with a new significance. I opened it, and the contents confirmed what I already knew. But now, seeing it laid out was different. It contained statements, certificates, and carefully organized notes from the various investment accounts. This nest egg had begun modestly, years ago, shortly after Richard's passing. I joined a senior finance club at the community center, a seemingly innocent pastime. It was there I learned the basics of compound interest, of diversified portfolios, of how even small, consistent investments could quietly blossom over time. While Daniel and Chloe were demanding more money for this unexpected expense or that urgent need, while I was cutting coupons and skipping my own meals, I had been quietly siphoning off a small portion of my pension, a tiny trickle that, over 15 years, had grown into a formidable stream. I had reinvested every penny of interest, every dividend, never touching the principal. It was a secret world, meticulously maintained, a silent rebellion against the constant drain on my publicly acknowledged resources. As I sifted through the documents, the numbers added up, rising higher and higher. The total, spread across various conservative yet shrewd investments, now exceeded $320,000. It was a staggering sum, especially for a retired school librarian. Daniel and the rest of the family had absolutely no idea it existed. They believed I was perpetually on the brink of financial strain, always willing to give but ultimately limited. This secret fund was my fortress, my last line of defense, built painstakingly in the shadows of their obliviousness. But that wasn't all. Tucked neatly within the larger folder, I discovered a sealed envelope, a smaller, thicker package, clearly marked in my careful script. Leo's College Fund. This was a separate, distinct fund, born of a different kind of hope. After the initial shock of Leo's cruel words, a profound wave of sadness had washed over me. Even as his words echoed, the deep-seated love for my grandson, the bright-eyed boy I had rocked to sleep, remained, albeit wounded. This fund was a testament to that enduring, albeit now complicated, love. Inside, Untouched and growing steadily over the years, lay nearly $45,000. It was a silent testament to my foresight, my unwavering desire for his future, regardless of his current behavior. I had envisioned presenting it to him on his 18th birthday, a grand gesture of my love, a foundation for his dreams. The thought of that now felt like a cruel irony. This fund, too, was a secret. Only Eleanor's name was on the account, a protective measure I had instinctively put in place years ago, a faint whisper of self-preservation amidst my boundless giving. I stared at the figures for a long time, absorbing the sheer weight of my secret. $365,000. This was more than money. It was freedom. It was security. It was power. They believed I had nothing left to give, that I was truly done, a spent force, a dried-up well. They saw me as a woman clinging to old memories, a figure of pity, certainly not one with any substantial means or hidden resources. But I wasn't. Not by a long shot, I declared silently to myself, my voice strong and clear in the stillness of the room. The cold anger which had been simmering now coalesced into something harder, more resolute. This wouldn't be about revenge, not in the petty, vindictive sense of the word. No, that wasn't my style. This would be a quiet, decisive rebalance. A rebalancing of the scales that had been tipped so heavily, so unfairly, in their favor for so long. It was a profound shift of power, a slow, deliberate retraction of the boundless energy and resources I had poured into them. It was about returning that power, that control, to the woman who had steadfastly upheld everyone else for too long. My life, my resources, my worth, they were mine again. And with this realization, a chilling thought began to form. A plan born not of malice, but of a desperate, quiet need for justice. They had taken everything they could from me. Now I would take back what was mine, and perhaps a little more. The days that followed that terrible Thursday dinner were a blur of quiet, resolute action. The cold anger and newfound clarity had settled into a steady hum, guiding my every move. There was no hesitation, no wavering. The decision had been made. The old Eleanor was gone, and the new one was charting a course for independence, for peace, for a reckoning long overdue. By the end of the week, 3 pivotal phone calls, made with a strange, detached calm, set a new, irreversible course for my life. The first call was to Jenna Holbrook, a local realtor whom I used to see at the town book fairs, where we'd chat about novels and gardening. Her voice, usually warm and bubbly, held a note of genuine surprise when I stated my intention. "Eleanor, are you sure selling your home? This house has been yours forever," she exclaimed, her tone laced with concern. It wasn't just a house. It was a landmark, a part of my identity in this town. It was the home Richard and I had built, where Daniel had grown up. Every nail, every paint stroke held a memory. "That's exactly why it's time, Jenna," I replied, my voice calm and firm, devoid of the tremor I might have expected. The words felt strangely liberating. I explained that I needed to downsize, to simplify, to find something fresh. Jenna, sensing an unspoken resolve, didn't press further, though I could hear the curiosity in her voice. She promised to start the paperwork immediately, to handle everything with discretion. I felt a pang of something akin to sadness, but it was quickly overshadowed by a growing sense of liberation. This house, once my sanctuary, had also become a cage, a monument to a past that no longer served me. The second call was to the bank, a more complex, intricate conversation that involved several layers of security and verification. I spoke with a manager, explaining my desire to arrange the discreet transfer of all my investments, the entirety of my quiet nest egg, into a new, hidden account at a different institution, one outside of town, one that neither Daniel nor Chloe would ever have reason to suspect. The manager, accustomed to clients' desires for privacy, handled my request with professional efficiency, asking no prying questions beyond the necessary protocols. This was a critical step, severing the financial ties that had always left me vulnerable, ensuring that my future was truly my own, unburdened by past expectations or future demands. As the transfers were confirmed, I felt a tightening in my chest, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. It was done. My financial independence was now secured, a fortress built against any future encroachment. The third call was simple, almost anticlimactic. I called a cab company, ordering a ride for a week from now for an undisclosed destination. I gave a departure time, an address, and nothing more. The mundane act of arranging transportation for a journey into the unknown underscored the profound seismic shift occurring in my life. I was leaving, quietly, utterly, completely. I told no one of my plans. There was no longer any need. The desire to explain, to justify, to seek understanding or pity had completely evaporated. Their indifference had finally burned away my need for their validation. There was no farewell to prepare, no apologies to demand, no explanations to offer. Their actions had spoken volumes, and my silence would be my response. In the days leading up to my departure, I went through my home, not with sentimentality, but with a detached practicality. I packed only what truly mattered, what held intrinsic value beyond monetary worth. A few essential clothes neatly folded into a small suitcase. Richard's precious letters tucked safely into the mahogany box along with my day planner, now a chronicle of my awakening rather than my sacrifices. And perhaps most importantly, the irreplaceable family photo albums. Images of a younger Daniel, of Richard's laughing face, of Leo as a baby, a testament to the love that had existed, even if it had become corrupted. These were the memories I would carry with me, untainted by the recent bitterness. Everything else, the heavy ornate dining table where so many unspoken hurts had accumulated, the mismatched dishes that Chloe always found quaint, the comfortable sofa that had borne witness to so many of my silent worries, the furniture that filled every room, even the old wall clock Daniel once deemed too old-fashioned, was left behind. It all felt like dead weight, remnants of a life that was no longer mine. The house, soon to be empty, would be sold, its proceeds a final boost to my renewed independence. They could have it all, or rather, they could have none of it. It was no longer my concern. The morning of my departure dawned gray and misty, a fitting backdrop for my quiet exit. The cab arrived precisely on time, its yellow gleam a stark contrast to the subdued light. I walked out of the house for the last time, the small suitcase in one hand, the mahogany box and photo albums clutched tightly in the other. I didn't lock the door. It felt symbolic, a final abandonment of the need for security, a severance of ties. As the cab pulled away from the familiar curb, slowly turning down the street, I didn't look back. Not once. I expected to feel a surge of emotion, a wave of tears, a pang of regret for the life I was leaving behind. But instead, there was nothing but an overwhelming sense of air, like I could finally, truly breathe. The suffocating weight had lifted, the invisible chains had been broken. It wasn't freedom yet, not entirely, but it was the first exhilarating taste of it, and in that moment, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Eleanor felt utterly, completely, terrifyingly, and wonderfully alone. The cab ride was long, 2 hours of silent contemplation as the familiar landscape gave way to winding coastal roads and a horizon dominated by the vast, shimmering expanse of the sea. I watched the world pass by, feeling like a witness to my own escape. My destination was Rose Bay, a tranquil coastal town I'd only ever seen in postcards. It was a place I'd once dreamed of visiting with Richard, a quiet, almost forgotten desire that had resurfaced with surprising clarity during my sleepless nights. Now it was my new beginning. Rose Bay was everything I'd hoped for and more. The small town breathed fresh sea air, carrying the briny scent of the ocean mixed with hints of blooming honeysuckle. Rows of charming pastel-colored houses lined the streets, their sun-drenched facades a gentle invitation. And at the heart of the town, near the bustling little harbor, was a bakery perpetually fragrant with the warm, comforting aromas of cinnamon and honey. It was a place where life seemed to move at a gentler pace, a quiet antidote to the frantic, demanding world I had left behind. My new apartment was on the second floor of a sturdy brick building nestled comfortably among its pastel neighbors. It had crisp white shutters and a tiny wrought iron balcony that overlooked the peaceful Cerulean Bay. I stood on that balcony for a long time on my first evening, watching the fishing boats bob gently in the distance, feeling the cool sea breeze on my face. It wasn't grand, I mused to myself, a faint smile touching my lips. But it was mine, and it was quiet in all the right ways. The silence here wasn't suffocating. It was spacious, inviting, a canvas onto which I could paint a new life. There was no one here to demand, to criticize, to erase, just the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the distant cries of gulls. On my third day, a yearning for familiarity, for a place that felt intrinsically Eleanor, led me to the local library. As I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the comforting scent of old books, dust motes dancing in sunbeams, and the subtle aroma of wood polish instantly embraced me. It felt like coming home, a deep, resonant sense of belonging I hadn't realized I'd missed so profoundly. This was my sanctuary, my true element. A young woman with a tangle of curly hair and bright, intelligent eyes peered over her glasses from behind the circulation desk. "Can I help you, ma'am? Looking for anything specific?" she asked, her voice soft and welcoming. I felt a warmth spread through me. "Just a card," I replied, "and maybe a little place to sit and read." The simplicity of the request, the genuine desire for nothing more than quiet solace and intellectual companionship, felt like a revelation. It had been years since I'd simply read for pleasure, without an agenda, without a need to escape. Within a week, the library became my second home. My quiet presence, a calming force honed by years of silent observation, quickly proved invaluable. I started volunteering for the Saturday Children's Reading Hour, my voice once dismissed as history lectures, now weaving tales that captivated young minds. The children listened, their eyes wide with wonder, their innocent smiles a balm to my bruised spirit. There was no demand for gratitude, no expectation of payment, just the pure joy of sharing stories. By the second month, the library offered me a small stipend to help catalog new arrivals. It wasn't about the money, though it was a welcome supplement to my pension. It was about the validation, the recognition of my skills, my worth. I hadn't felt this genuinely useful in years. Not in the way where I was being used, but in the way that lit you up from the inside. It was a purpose chosen by me, for me, entirely detached from the expectations of my old life. The gentle rhythm of organizing, labeling, and shelving new books was a meditative act, each book placed with care, each action a quiet affirmation of my newfound autonomy. My apartment slowly transformed from a temporary dwelling into a true home. I bought curtains in my favorite color, a soft oceanic blue, allowing the sunlight to filter in, painting the walls with a gentle glow. I started drinking coffee simply because I loved the rich aroma, not out of habit or necessity. I cooked meals for one, savoring each bite, experimenting with flavors I'd never had time for. My days were mine, my choices my own. And then there was Leon, a retired literature professor who lived down the hall with a kind face and a gentle wit. We met by chance, bumping into each other at the local market, and soon found ourselves sharing conversations that stretched for hours. We talked about books, about classical music, about the art of starting over. Leon, it turned out, was a widower himself, and he understood the quiet nuances of grief and renewal. His company was a comfort, a gentle reminder that connection was possible, that companionship could be found without obligation or expectation. We shared silent nods of understanding, a kinship born of shared experience. Throughout this period of quiet rebuilding, I maintained my silence regarding my old family. There were no angry letters, no grand announcements, no desperate attempts to reach out or explain. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. My silence was not a punishment, but a boundary, a protective shield around the fragile new life I was building. It was a steady, serene reclamation of the woman long buried beneath others' needs, a quiet blossoming that required no audience, no applause, only the gentle nourishment of my own care and attention. I was healing slowly, deliberately, rediscovering pieces of Eleanor I thought were lost forever. 2 months, 2 glorious months of sun-drenched mornings, quiet evenings, and the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding a life that was truly my own. Rose Bay had become my sanctuary, the library my calling, and Leon, my kind neighbor, a gentle balm to my soul. I had not heard a word from my old family, and the silence, once a source of pain, was now a welcome peace. Then, one brisk morning, as I collected my mail, I saw it. A familiar, hurried scrawl on an envelope addressed to me. A letter from Daniel. My stomach did a small clench, a phantom echo of the anxiety I used to feel. But it quickly passed, replaced by a detached curiosity. I opened it, stepping back into the cool quiet of my apartment. His handwriting was indeed hurried and sloppy, a mirror of the frantic energy I remembered. The first page was a whirlwind of guilt-laced words, a cascade of half-apologies woven with thinly veiled questions about my whereabouts, my well-being, my future plans. "Mom, we've been so worried," it began, a line so transparently false it almost made me chuckle. "Chloe and I are so sorry about things. We know we haven't been ourselves lately. Where have you gone? Why didn't you say anything?" There was no true remorse, only a frantic grasping for information, an attempt to reestablish control. But the true motive, as I had expected, emerged on the second page. It was a rapid descent from feigned concern to outright demand. "Leo's school tuition is due next week, and we're short," he wrote. The ink pressed hard into the paper, betraying his desperation. "The bank isn't being helpful. I know you said you're not supporting us anymore, but he's your grandson, Mom. He needs this. You wouldn't want Leo to miss out, would you?" The emotional blackmail was as blatant as it was predictable. My grandson, a pawn in their financial games, an instrument to manipulate me back into my old role. I carefully folded the letter, the paper rustling softly in my hands. There was no anger, no fresh surge of pain, just a quiet, resolute certainty. I placed it in a drawer beside my reading glasses, leaving it pointedly unanswered. My silence, once a sign of resignation, was now a deliberate choice, a powerful boundary. They had used my love against me for too long. That era was over. The old house in Hollow Ridge, my former home, sold the following week. The funds from the sale cleared without issue, a significant sum that further fortified my financial independence. Daniel, it seemed, had only learned of the sale after the fact, a detail Jenna, my realtor, had handled with admirable discretion. He attempted to challenge the sale in court, claiming he should have been consulted, that he had a right to the property. But my meticulous paperwork, a lifetime of careful documentation, was flawless. I had handled every detail myself, anticipating their potential maneuvers, ensuring every legal I was dotted and every white T was crossed. The judge dismissed his claim almost immediately. That day, Daniel called me 10 times. My phone, once a source of silent longing, now rang incessantly with his insistent demands. Each vibration was a reminder of the frantic chaos I had escaped, but I didn't pick up once. Instead, I walked to a local jewelry shop in Rose Bay, Mr. Eberly's establishment, a charming little place tucked away on a side street. I handed him my small, worn gold wedding band, the symbol of a love that had anchored my entire existence. It was a tangible link to Richard, but also a symbol of the woman I had been, the woman who had lived for others. "I'd like to melt this down," I told Mr. Eberly, "into a simple, strong bracelet. Nothing flashy," I specified, "just a solid piece. And I'd like an engraving on the inside." A week later, the bracelet was ready. It was understated, elegant, a gleaming band of gold that felt sturdy and comforting on my wrist. And on the inside, etched in a delicate script, were three powerful words, the very words Richard had written to me in his letter, the words that had ignited my reawakening. "You are enough." It was a constant, tangible reminder of my worth, a quiet symbol of my new beginning, a testament to the love that truly mattered. One morning, as I continued the daily routine, I opened my mailbox to find something unexpected, a postcard from Leo. It was a simple drawing of his new school, the lines crude but recognizable, and a handwritten line that read, "Grandma, I hope you're okay. I miss you." There was no sarcasm, no hidden requests, just the raw, unadorned sentiment of a child. I stared at the postcard for a long time, the simple words cutting through the layers of my carefully constructed piece. A soft smile graced my lips, a complex mixture of tenderness and sorrow. It wasn't an apology, not truly, but it was a crack in the wall, a faint echo of the innocent boy I had once adored. I reflected on walking away, not as an act of punishment, though they undoubtedly perceived it as such, but as an essential step to protect my own hard-won peace. It wasn't about hurting them, it was about saving myself. It was about defining my boundaries, about reclaiming my worth, about refusing to be erased any longer. Sometimes I realize, with a profound sense of clarity, silence isn't a sign of weakness. Sometimes it's the loudest, most definitive statement one can make, a declaration of self that echoes far beyond any spoken word. My quiet departure, my steadfast refusal to engage, was not an absence but a powerful presence, a testament to the woman I had finally become. Eleanor's journey began with a life consumed by giving, a generosity that, like the cranberry stain on the tablecloth, often marked her as unwanted or unnoticed. Funny how things leave a mark when they're no longer wanted. She remembered feeling that emptiness, a hunger not for food but for recognition, an unacknowledged ache in her soul. It was a silent truth that, unbeknownst to her then, foreshadowed her revenge story, just not the kind that makes headlines. Mine would be quieter but far more permanent. From the age of 30, a widow raising Daniel alone, she had tirelessly sacrificed, cutting coupons, working extra shifts, always believing love meant limitless giving, just as she had done from the moment her husband passed and Daniel was just 11. But the brutal dismissal at the dinner table, the casual cruelty of "shut up, widow," shattered that belief, tearing through the carefully constructed facade of her life. Reviewing her meticulous ledger, Eleanor confronted the stark reality of her self-erasure, the cost of her unconditional love. It was Richard's forgotten words, echoing from the past, "You are enough," that finally sparked her reawakening. Her subsequent quiet departures, selling her home, securing her hidden nest egg, leaving behind the material remnants of her old life, were not acts of vengeance but necessary steps of self-preservation. In Rose Bay, she found genuine purpose and peace, a new identity forged in self-care. The unanswered pleas from Daniel, the small, hopeful postcard from Leo, became affirmations of her new boundaries. Her silence, once a sign of being overlooked, became her most powerful statement, a definitive rebalance, proving that reclaiming one's peace is the ultimate triumph.